the idea of, we love competition, but the same aspect that kind of gets some fear into us. And I think whenever we do, whether it be big missions or otherwise, we hate the idea of getting evaluated on there, right? So you talked about, or I talked a little about pro cons and fit reps and all those things, right? How much of those sometimes dictate our actions? Because someone is giving us a grade on life, right, in a lot of ways. And a lot of pilots feel that same way, right? They feel that because they're getting a grade, more or less, on the flight, that it makes them nervous, right? And I think that's the biggest mental block to get over. It's not their skills, because their skills are there, right? The fact of the matter is they got to get over that sense of nerves. They got to get over that sense of stress when they go forward. And that's the hardest thing. And how do you get over that? I think by nothing else than practice, right? I mean, for anybody, whether it be sports or whatever challenge that you've ever faced in life, sometimes the only way to get over, right, is doing it. And that's kind of what we put folks through, is to get through that stress in order just to, I say, normalize that stress and be used to that a little bit more. But that's a great question. So how do you get over that? I don't necessarily know. We just keep doing it, right? You get yourself into a spot where you can't swim all that much farther, and you got to make yourself back. So that's good. Have you ever faced something like that? No. No challenges? Get yourself out there too far in the water, get a little scared?
Well, I think I did drown once when I was a kid, but...
Now, does that keep you away from the water? Or you ready to go back? Yeah.
The water's fun.
Yeah, that's right. But that's how we learn, right? I mean, so I think as my kids are out there in the water, we learn that as it feels like you're that close to drowning, but then you make it, right? And the next time you got a little bit more of that confidence in you. And I think that's what we try to do, right? Is push ourselves past the area of comfort, but not quite to the area of utter danger and bad consequences, right? And I think that's one of the things that we do when we teach pilots, called the mental aspect. So, awesome question.
That's a great question. What other questions?
What? Oh,
Go ahead.
I have a really short one. So, what are all the jets that you've flown and different stuff you've flown?
Well, I mean, really, the primary two jets that I've flown is the F-18. I mean, so it's the same thing that your dad's flown. F-18 and the F-35, right? So those are the two that I've flown throughout my career. It's been 15 years in the Marine Corps now, outside of all the training planes and whatnot. But they've both been fun in their own different reasons. It's interesting to see how Top Gun decides to go with things, but Top Gun the movie, I should say. Very interesting path. But yeah, so it's been good. That's a good question. Nick?
I was going to ask, what was your biggest kind of draw towards Christianity, like as a young kid with your family ties?
So yeah, I think that's if I kind of go into a little bit of the story and the background on some of these things, and so I'll tell you, my dad, he did develop a sense of religious traditions within our family, and for me it was an interesting time growing up, right? So I was in high school when 9/11 happened, right? As a professing Muslim, obviously lots of difficulties, lots of difficult conversations happening around that, and I think there was a lot of aspects that I held firm to the faith of my father, and I think in a lot of ways, right, my religion was my religion because it was his religion, right, and in some ways his religion is his religion because it was his father's religion, right? So a little bit within the Indonesian culture, there's a lot of family aspect that comes to a lot of those things, and at one point in time, I think the questions that we always have to ask ourselves, and even if we're a Christian, it's still a very important question to always ask ourselves, right, is what is the truth and how do we know the truth, right? And I think that a lot of us, right, can probably go back, right, and maybe I'll ask, okay, we'll ask you this question, like how do we know what truth is?
From the Bible?
We know from the Bible, right? So I think we know from Scripture. We hold Scripture to have ultimate authority over everything, right? We know that to be something that goes down, right? So a lot of these questions, I had to ask myself, and it for sure was not an easy thing, and a lot of that, further on in life, this is, in my middle years in college, when I started to ask myself those questions, and those questions started to come at a head, I think, to the point of what do I actually believe? And there are things that I say that I believe, and there's things that I start to actually know that I believe, and some of those things caused a lot of, I say, consternation amongst my family, and still do in many ways. But nonetheless, like I said, I think what we are always bound to, right, is in this case we are not just bound to a higher power, but I think we are ultimately saved by the grace of God, and ultimately that is what saves us all, right? As we start to take an understanding of this, and ultimately what we realize is that saving grace ultimately is only provided for us when we see the nature of our sin. While we didn't talk too much about the decisions we make here, but when we start to look at the way of human nature, and sometimes we can look around us and just see how bad it is sometimes that we as people can be, and the sin nature that we have, to recognize the amount of grace that we need. And the fact of the matter is that there's a singular way in which we now find salvation through that, and that's through Jesus Christ. So that ultimately is a lot of the path that came down. But I think that's good. Thanks, Zach.
I've got a question. Would you mind sharing what your most challenging either event or part of life was? You talk about challenges. You talk about, Elion asked about fears that pilots go through. We all have personal challenges that we face, and then, we have professional challenges we face. Would you mind sharing maybe one of your most significant challenges that you faced and how you were able to work through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think maybe it's a little bit, the way I'll answer this question, I think the hardest and the most challenging aspect of my life was probably having a family and having kids. Just like Jim talked about, just like probably all of us, right? I want to win, and I want, I want to try to succeed and be the best at everything that I can be. And what I recognize is that there's a lot of selfishness that goes into that, right? Maybe we think that's out of goodness, right? Of practicing, and we kind of talked about it, staying at work later and doing the next thing. All of a sudden, what I recognize is, when I was married, that was one aspect. When I started having kids, it was another aspect to realize that the time that I wanted to myself was solely just for myself, right? It was a very selfish desire to want to constantly do stuff for myself. So the very nature of having kids, the very nature of having someone else, and like I said, that's not just necessarily being married. That is with friends, that is with other family, etc. There are things that are naturally going to want to pull us away from ourselves, right? And I think what we start to realize is the biggest challenge we are always going to have, and it's going to look different in everybody's life. The biggest challenge we're always going to have is pulling away from ourselves, because those things that we're going to want to do are going to be all to satisfy ourselves, right? The times that we choose to play, like I said, play video games longer than we need to, the time that we choose to completely pig out, right, on the cake more than anything else, that's to satisfy those things that we as individuals just want, right? And the times that's always going to make it harder is when it pulls us away from self. And for me, in a lot of ways, the family is what made me realize a lot of those things, that in so many ways I just closed in and just said, I need to study for this flight, I need to do this and I need to do that. And what it meant was lots more hours at work, a lot less time at home. And I realized the selfishness of my actions for so many years that came through that. So I think that's ultimately the biggest challenge, and it's still a challenge that I face today. So that challenge that I dealt with when Caleb was born back in 2010 are those same challenges that I try to deal with now as they are growing up, and I'm still trying to figure out what does that look like. And that's not just a work-life balance, but where's my heart? As I talked about, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. And sometimes I recognize, right, even now, that my treasure sometimes does lie in work. My treasure does lie in those things that I want to do, and that is that challenge that I dealt with back then is still the challenge I deal with now. And we're always going to be fighting that challenge. Like I said, it probably exists in your life too, and it's important, I think, that we recognize what that challenge is. And like I said, it's really just a matter of, am I serving myself or am I serving others, right? And we know that Jesus said, right, that there are two important commandments: love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And the second one is just like it, love your neighbor as yourself, right? And that is the hardest aspect, is to love others, whether that be family, friends, siblings, otherwise, to love them as much as you love yourself, right? As much as that selfish desire is in yourself, to go out and love others. So that's
Awesome. Thank you, Zach. Thanks for answering. Any other questions? I know you guys are ready to go to the race. All right. Thanks, Zach. Appreciate it.